That's even better. Good evening. Good evening. Good evening. We'd like to get underway if we could. I know folks have other things to do on a midweek night. There's the final game of the World Series, for instance.
No Nationals.
Lots going on. Okay, my name is Steve Cole. I'm regional planner for Maine DOT in the Mid-Coast. I've lived in the Mid-Coast for 30 years, both in Belfast and now in Damascotta. Joined tonight by Robin Dostey, who is recording in text form the meeting and your comments, and a transcript will be sent to the town in due course. Also, the town's recording the meeting, so there's that mode available as well. Let's see. Vicki Dudera is here, your state representative. Audra Collar-Bell is here, town manager. Also, Jeremy Martin, the director of planning and development, and also members of the Board of Selectmen who I may not know personally. You're welcome to introduce yourselves if you've not already done so. We also have a sign-in sheet. We'd appreciate it if you could add your name and affiliation to that. This really is a conversational kind of meeting. We're told that speaking in front of the mic is valuable. I will sort of start off with a brief summary of the state of the Rawson Avenue Bridge, where we're at with that, and then we'll open it up to your comments and thoughts. We're going to ask folks to speak one at a time, to speak clearly, and either come up to the mic or Jeremy's willing to come to you. But clarity and folks speaking one at a time is useful both for the recording and for Robin. So with that, let me repeat for you what you already know, that the Rawson Avenue Bridge was closed in mid-April this year because of serious structural issues, most especially the bridge's substructure. It was built in 1935, I imagine, as a WPA project and built by the state of Maine. Bridges in Maine, all bridges in Maine, are inspected by the state every 2 years. And this bridge was last inspected, I think, in February of 2019, when it was made clear that it had deteriorated to such a degree that it needed to be closed. And since that time, DOT has met with the town to discuss the status of the bridge and its possibilities going forward. And I will also say that the bridge, even before it was closed, was on a list of bridges that DOT had determined need to be closed and taken off the state system. It has essentially a 5-year span in which it identifies bridges that will eventually need to be closed and removed from the state system or taken over by another entity. So the process we're going through now would have happened anyway, even if the bridge were still marginally functional and people in the neighborhood were still using it. It just so happens in this case that the bridge's decay outstripped DOT's expected time frame. In very early September, a member of the bridge program and myself met with Jeremy and with Audra and with your Public Works Department staff and talked about the prospects for the bridge going forward. If DOT simply had been left to its own devices, it would simply have removed the bridge, created a landscape berm at both sides, as well as an adequate means for folks, for delivery trucks and for snow plows and for fire and rescue vehicles to use both ends of the street. But we also offered, as sort of a parting investment, that depending upon the interests of the town, DOT could entertain paying half the cost of either building a new bridge as a vehicular bridge or as a bike pedestrian bridge. And we heard strongly from town staff at that time that the latter was probably the interest in town. So from that point to tonight, we're in a place of wanting to hear and needing to hear directly from neighbors, from residents, from other folks in town about their feelings about the bridge, whether they would support its rebuilding either as a vehicular bridge or as a pedestrian bike bridge. We're here also to answer your questions and to talk about what a schedule might be going forward, depending upon what your interests are. So with that, I think we'll begin to hear from the assembled. Is there anyone who would like to offer thoughts?
And Jeff, remember, we need to talk into the mic.
Okay, Jeremy. Jeff Scott, and I'm the chair of the Pathways Committee. And Stephen, before I get started, I want to thank you and MDOT for giving you the time to come down and chat with us. I read about all of the maintenance and projects that you guys are managing, enormous multi-million-dollar projects, and this is a little tiny little one. So that kind of attention we really, really appreciate. Wanted to get that out there and let you know about that. So I'm the chair of the Pathways Committee. There are a number of members here tonight. I'm sure they're, although, let's see, Richard, Anita, I think that's about it. If I missed anybody, I don't know. Most of these people are community members and neighbors. The fundamental question we have is how to make this go forward as a pedestrian bridge, the Pathways Committee. And so we're wondering about that. I think if I could just do a straw poll, if that's out of line, I don't know, how many people think that's a great idea to have a pedestrian bridge here? Okay, just to give you an idea about that. And I've got a number of letters from people who were unable to make it, and they all say the same things. I printed them out here. I don't think, if you want, I can give them to you. I don't want to spend the time going over them, including the school. School couldn't make it tonight. They were supportive of a pedestrian way for the kids to come to school. We did a survey of the users. Jeremy, did you see that, Steve? Yeah, there were about 32 to 35, over a 3-week period, there were 32 to 35 users in the fall daily. And those users were walkers and cyclers. They were going to Meg Market. They were going to just for a walk on the Riverwalk. They were going to the farmers market, and they were going to school or to town. And all variety. It was really fun to meet all the people. I was really surprised at the numbers, and users started about 6 a.m. and about 6 p.m. That's the range. Even though it's dark, they were still heading out there.
That's when the bridge is officially closed.
That's when the bridge was closed. That's right.
So they're all scofflaws, I guess.
I don't know.
They're returning home from work.
Maybe. So one of the fears, because right now the bridge is working for the community. Everybody's using it, and we know it's closed. Last year, there were 5-ton trucks driving across it, and this year we can't walk across it. We're afraid that there's going to be a fence put up. Is that a rumor? That'll not let us do what we're doing now? And how long can we continue to be scofflaws? So, yeah, that's about it. No, you can use that one.
Have a response?
Nope, I don't. Oh,
I thought I saw you raise your hand. I can't tell you how long you can continue to be scofflaws. And when I've been on the property, I've certainly noticed people crossing as well. And I am told that the bridge program at DOT has plans to make access impossible there because of their fears, given the condition of the bridge, and their concerns about liability, clearly. But that has not happened yet. So I guess we will all proceed until something changes. But I can tell you that it would not be possible for me or for the town to convince the bridge program not to entirely limit access there. I think for the reasons I've given you, there would be some finality in their response.
and that's what I heard directly from the bridge folks as well.
Just in the spirit of conversation, is there any way to, I know these are engineers, and I looked at the report that they publish on the condition of the bridges. Some of it makes sense, but at the end number in terms of the score, which scores the bridge very low in terms of safe, low would be bad for safety. I think it's 17 out of 100, 100 being perfect, so it scored low. In terms of the rest of Camden, I think the other lowest bridge was a 55 or 60 or something like that. But it's sort of a mystery how that number came about and where, yeah, I understand. I totally get the liability issue, because once the DOT has said it's unsafe, it just seems like if it's unsafe, I get it's unsafe for a 5-ton vehicle, which is what it was spec'd for, and I get that it's probably unsafe for 2 or 3-ton vehicle. But, you know, my Yankee intuition says that a person walking across it could probably do that for 20 or 30 more years. Just a guess.
I don't think 136-pound man is going to break it down.
Well, maybe it'll fall down by itself, is what I suspect eventually. But is there any way to ask for a more rigorous determination, not for cars, but for a person? You just think that's a long shot, Stephen?
I do think it's a long shot. I am willing to ask, but I think they're quite adamant about it, because actually pedestrian bridges do fail as well, even modern pedestrian bridges, as one did 2 years ago in Florida. And so those are the kinds of, that's the backdrop that DOT thinks about a closure in.
My name is Mark Ratner. I'm on the Camden Select Board. And my question is, knowing that they will not allow us to cross the bridge because of all that we just talked about, and knowing that it is an important thoroughfare for our walkers, pedestrians, and it's going to take time to figure out what we're going to do. And I appreciate that DOT is willing to come in and pay half of the cost of a new, hopefully, pedestrian bridge, bicycle bridge. would it make sense, is there, if with the engineers, could they identify something that could shore up the bridge for just a 150-pound person? So that we're not going from, we're not going totally cutting it off, would it be somewhat effective to do a minor repair, hopefully, that would support it for walking until such time as we know what's going on, instead of cutting it off entirely? And one of the big concerns that I've heard is that without that bridge, we are sending people, anybody that's walking is going up a different route, more hills, and without sidewalks. And that particularly affects the students going to the middle school. And that's my biggest concern. Adults, can fare for themselves, hopefully, but kids, middle school kids especially, that's a big concern for us. So is there a way to do a temporary repair until we know more what's going on? Has that ever been discussed? Has it ever happened?
In my relatively brief tenure, it has not happened. From my view, what DOT seems to do with bridges is either maintain them or close them and rebuild them. But nonetheless, that's a line of questioning that, again, I am happy to pose to the bridge engineers, and would be back in touch with a response.
Anita Brosius Scott. I live on Ames Terrace, just up the hill from the bridge. Two questions coming off of the previous questions. When you say that you would be potentially willing to pay for half the cost of the bridge, would DOT be willing to pay for all the cost of the engineering and then half the cost of the actual construction, especially given the high cost of construction these days and the small size of this town? The engineering is a significant cost to a bridge, and I just wondered if you'd throw us that bone. And the other question, the other sort of statement relates to something that Mark just said about walkers. In order to detour around the closure, walkers have to go along Ames Terrace, which is the road we live on, turn pretty much a blind corner where there's no viable street lighting in very, very dark area, no sidewalk, and come down to Washington Street. The traffic along Ames Terrace has obviously changed since the bridge has closed, and it is also speeding up, and there are more people who are running the stop sign that is at the three-way stop sign at the top of the hill. So basically, the bottom line is that it's not a safe place to send walkers down Ames Terrace. It really isn't. It really worries me about school children going that way. But any walkers, really. It's a very unsafe, unlit place to walk with a ditch down the east side that, would be hard to get into if a car wandered. And so that is a very great concern.
I'd like to second exactly what she said. I live on Ames Terrace, Michael Harrell, Ames Terrace. Exactly what Anita said is what's happening. People now know that that bridge is closed. They're ignoring the stop sign, and they're just flying along. And out of curiosity, I went down to McGonagall Market, and I took my little tool with me. There's a 10-meter, 33-foot gradient difference between Washington Street and the top. It is a blind hill. It's a blind hill. Now, Ames Terrace should give you an idea of how that started out. That was not a through street. It was never designed. It eventually migrated down onto 105, but it was an extension from Rawson. Look at, wow, the other way around.
Came
Okay.
out from Washington and ended, and then it was
Right.
made to connect to Rawson.
So it was never designed for the type of traffic that we are now seeing. I mean, I was overseas working when all this happened. I had no clue. When my wife drove me home, I was stunned to see the bridge was closed because it's been posted for years. It's not snuck up on the DOT. It's not snuck up on the town. It's been known. And all of a sudden it's closed. For structural reasons, fair enough. But to consider not building a new bridge, I think between the town of Camden and the state, we should be able to find a way to fund the bridge replacement. Instead of talking, I understand what you mean about a walking bridge, but I'd like to see a functioning bridge. That is right down from the school, and that's how people used to go to get their kids to school. Now they're going all the way down Ames Terrace. So our traffic has doubled overnight. And Ames Terrace wasn't a great road before all this happened. There's a 45-degree bend, and then, as I said, there's a 10-meter elevation change on a blind hill. No street light, no sidewalk. So instead of just cutting to a walking path, bridge, or whatever, as a resident, I mean, we're a wealthy town. We've got our own ski resort, and we can't maintain our infrastructure. We can't maintain it. Out of curiosity, and thank you very much for coming tonight. I've been stewing about this for a while. Now at least I have a chance to speak publicly. Not well, but publicly. I had a quick look at your website, just because I'm wondering what your marching orders are. And right at the very top, I had my questions answered. To responsibly provide our customers with the safest, most reliable transportation system possible. Those are the first words in your mission statement. Item one on that. I know, reliable funding, yes.
Based on available resources.
Right. But I think the state of Maine has the resources, and I certainly think the town has resources that long-term we should be looking at replacing the bridge. The second item, or the first item after that, it says manage the goals of the Maine DOT, manage the existing system. Manage the existing system. That's an existing road with an existing bridge. And as I said, it's been posted for years, so it's not really snuck up on anybody, and especially if you walked over it, you knew it. You know, the repairs on it are laughable. I mean, it's a cement bridge, and they're throwing tar over the little pieces of cement that have fallen out. It hasn't been maintained, at least not by, I work on boats for a living, and preventive maintenance is everything on a boat. But to just skip to 100 feet from here, at the end of 105, that bridge needed replacing. It probably didn't pass the structural test. We didn't end up with 4 dead-end streets. We got a new bridge. We could have just taken the same road and said, okay, no, we don't have the money, or nobody wants to pay for it. And you would have ended up with 4 dead-end streets down there. I think you probably would have heard a lot about that. We're Millville. We're not, we're not Beauchamp Point or whatever. We're just, I seem to think we're getting marginalized here. And I would like to see discussion on a solution that includes making or finding the funds to put a serviceable bridge in there, something that people could drive over. It was important in 1935, and it's not in, 2019?
Can we?
Yes, okay, I'm sorry. Okay.
I'm Kevin Bedford. I live on Rawson Avenue, actually at the bottom of the highest speed area of Rawson Avenue, because all of that 10-meter rise you have at the top of Ames Terrace comes right down past my house. And to me, this is a multifaceted topic. It's less than convenient to imagine not being able to get to the Riverwalk via Rawson Avenue, having to go around Ames Terrace. But it does seem to me also that one of the things we're discussing here is safety for walkers. And for 15 years, I walked my dog up and down that street twice a day. And as we know at this time of year, most of the time in the dark, with people in a hurry to get back home to Hope or to get into Camden or whatever. It's a through street people know about. I'd just like to throw out there that if in fact the bridge is not rebuilt and kept active in some way, that we consider sidewalks. That could in fact ameliorate a lot of the concerns that people have if we had a safe method of passage up and down those streets. Ames and Rawson, from Mechanic Street to Washington Street. I think for me, that would make a tremendous difference. But not wanting to make things easy because it's not my way. I just want to make a point too that the right left turns coming from McGinnicook Market, essentially we've got a lot more convoluted traffic pattern right now off of getting onto Ames Terrace than we ever had. Rawson Avenue was a much better, I think, traffic flow than Ames Terrace is, but Ames Terrace has a good bridge. That's it.
Steve, can I make just a comment? And I think, I'm not sure what you were trying to say in the beginning. I don't think people understood where you were getting at, that this bridge and the state is prioritizing all of their bridges. And this bridge would be on the list to go away, or the state to say, we're done with it, we're going to hand it over to whoever. Even if this didn't have structural problems, you would be doing that anyway because it doesn't meet your service level criteria of a bridge. So in reference to the bridge 100 feet down here, that had to be replaced. That clearly met a service level that needs a bridge, correct? The number of the use traffic that goes over that bridge all the time. Car traffic, correct. So I just wanted to clarify that because I think that is important, because you said it originally, we would be having this conversation at some point, even if the bridge was structurally fine, about the state saying, town, it's yours forever. I just wanted to clarify. Yep.
Hi, I'm Rick Doherty, and I live at the bottom of Rawson, right where the bridge is. And my question is, I know doesn't the town sewer line run underneath that bridge also? And some other utilities? My thought is, how expensive would it be to just put a bridge over the top of that one, whether it's a walking bridge or any other bridge, with steel beams? So you'd be walking over a brand-new bridge, but the old bridge would still be underneath it all.
Yeah.
Because it's private property on each side, and to put a walking bridge in, I don't think the owners of their property would want a walking bridge on either side. I know Elwood wouldn't.
Well,
I can't speak to the town infrastructure, but I can speak to the other part of the
I don't believe
question.
there's any utilities that are on that bridge, underneath that bridge.
Oh, okay.
If we left the bridge there and tried to build a bridge over it, I mean, the fact is that at some point that bridge will fail. Underneath. And what you have then is a real problem. I mean, if you look at it, unfortunately, we have a situation where the river comes and makes that bend right there. And if you got back in there in the river and behind that wall, you would see the structural failure that's happening there. So if you just left that bridge there, at some point that would collapse.
Right.
You can't really put a bridge over top of
You'd have to
that.
tear down the old bridge to put another,
put in-
a walking
correct.
bridge or whatever.
Because of its funding, because so much of its funding comes from the Federal Department of Transportation, is obligated to rebuild bridges to federal standards, which doesn't include building over a failed bridge.
Right.
So we wouldn't be able to do that.
True, and I will say that we do have a estimate price on a pedestrian bridge over it. We did work with a local engineer to give us a price on a pedestrian bridge, once that bridge went away. On a vehicular bridge as well, we do. Yeah, Audrey, please get a mic.
Sorry, everyone. So back about 2 years ago, we did a feasibility study for replacing the bridge as is with a vehicular pedestrian bridge. And we're looking at somewhere between, I would say, like $1 million to $1.5 million. And for the pedestrian bridge, we're looking at $250,000.
I think the most
Is
recent,
that correct?
No, that's a different concept. It's probably
Oh, sorry, yeah, it's not a pedestrian bridge that would go, it wouldn't be located where the current bridge is.
Correct, that would be located in both locations. And as I recall, Bob, do you remember the price on it? I thought it was 160, 190
For which one?
pedestrian.
The one we looked at? Oh, that's Roger's correct. That one is, there are a number of options to attack here, and this is really a detailed engineering discussion, which, I think is not what we want to get into here, because we're trying to get a feel for, and I think it's very important. I saw a lot of hands raised about a pedestrian bridge. It's great. I don't think we have crossed anything off, including a vehicular bridge, but just to answer your question, the pedestrian in its current location would probably be the better part of more like $600,000-$700,000. But in place, yeah, probably, and that'll make, but that's not, yeah, because of the refounding, because of the assumptions that Steve just mentioned about the end conditions, but that's not the only option for a pedestrian bridge. There are others, to Jeremy's comment, that it probably as low as $250,000.
Mm-hmm. And for me, I think one issue is the timing of, it's clear that DOT is going to remove this bridge at some point. Pretty clear to me. And if it will be hard for this town to stomach and the neighborhood to stomach 3 years, 4 years waiting for DOT to demo that bridge so we can replace it with a pedestrian bridge. So what I would encourage DOT to do is put this on their priority list to, once we kind of figure out the plan. You guys would not pay for 100% of a new vehicle bridge, is my understanding. You will pay for 50% of the cost of a pedestrian bridge, it sounds like.
Will it be all engineering?
It's included the project cost.
Right. What DOT will pay 50% of is the preliminary engineering, the environmental permitting, which I know in the case of this bridge could be tricky and maybe expensive. And then, of course, the construction of either a vehicular or a pedestrian bridge. Well, yeah, I meant an a bridge that would carry automobiles and bikes and pedestrians, or simply a bridge that would carry pedestrians, bikes, wheelchairs, et cetera.
And then it would be ours to maintain, because you guys, it doesn't meet your service levels.
Right. At the end of the construction period, the bridge and its ongoing maintenance would be turned over to the town of Camden. Yeah. It's like other questions or comments?
Wyatt McConnell, I live on Rawson Avenue. I'm a scofflaw. So to reiterate this idea of it being fast track, because it seems like the only reason you're here really is to get feedback about how important this bridge is to the town, rather than talking about minutia of what the final decision should be. DOT is here for transportation, and it's considered a low traffic bridge because it's just measuring car traffic. I walk across that bridge to lunch every day to McGonigal Market. I walk across that bridge at least a half dozen times a week to go to my mother-in-law's house. I walk across that bridge another several times a month to go to, where's Patrick Coloran, to their house so that my kids can play with them. I'll live within a stone's throw of the middle school, and I'll have to drive my kids to the middle school. And on top of that, I also walk into town plenty, and so every time I'm walking into town, if that bridge is out of there, then now there's another car that has to find a parking space in Route 1. I've got to drive down those roads. And so, Jeff mentioned that this is a small project, and it is. I'm sure, DOT has huge projects, but part of those huge projects are there is because we don't have these small projects that allow us to walk through our communities instead of always having to drive everywhere. And so instead of thinking of it as just a small project that isn't worth our consideration, think of the impact it has on other potential larger projects of, oh, okay, so if we have a bridge here that people can use for transportation of their bodies, be it bicycle or foot or a car or whatever, then you potentially save money on some of these other larger projects. And regardless of whether you're saving money on the larger projects, DOT is there to give us the transportation. That bridge has been under state ownership for a long time, and closing it simply because of the number of cars that go across it doesn't satisfy DOT's mission. It's for transportation, whether that's foot traffic, bike traffic, car traffic, et cetera. So that's what I have to say.
Gentleman in the back, and then here.
So we've kind of talked around some different figures. It would be this many 100,000 for the pedestrian bridge. Can we come up with like a factor? If a pedestrian bridge costs X, what is the vehicular bridge? Is that 10 times as much? Is it 20 times as much? I mean, I don't know. I'm asking the question.
I can't answer that question as a planner and not as an engineer, but essentially the figures I've read both in the local Camden paper and those that Jeremy and the Board of Selectmen have quoted seem right to me. I know the DOT engineers back of the envelope to that bridge replacement at $1 million plus to carry vehicles and others. And I imagine that 2/3 or half of that cost might cover a pedestrian bridge. But that's as much as I can share, as much as I know.
That's more than I knew when I came in the door tonight, so thank you.
Gentleman in front has been...
Yeah, I'm Tom Resick. I'm at 67 Rawson, right at the bridge. So I've got a few concerns. One is I strongly support the pedestrian idea. I think that's much better value for the money. I understand the concern of the gentleman who lives on Ames Terrace, but we had the same problem at Rawson, and the bridge itself is very narrow there, and there are no sidewalks. And so the danger is similar either way, and I feel bad for them as well. And I would strongly propose sidewalks wherever the traffic flow is going to go. But the important thing, I think, is the time frame, because I don't know what they're going to make this barrier out of, but unless it's a concrete barrier, people are going to find a way to probably go around it one way or another, either going on people's property or other ways. And it's just it's a huge safety issue. What's going to happen if a kid gets killed because this bridge is closed? Is there any liability there for the highway department? I would think there might be. I don't know. But anyway, it's really important, and it's really hard for us to understand why that couldn't be made safe while we're waiting for the big change, so foot traffic can go over that, because it's certainly, if 5-ton vehicles were going over and over and over it, and it wasn't crumbling at the moment. I mean, it technically is, but not. I mean, anybody can see foot traffic in the next 3 years or 2 years is not going to make that bridge fall apart. Thank you.
Yes.
Now, my name is Howard Brown. I too live up on Ames Terrace, and because of the heavy flow of all that traffic that we're getting because of that closure, I mean, I used to take my dog for a walk. He's just a little guy, and it seems like the cars are, man, I thought there was a rule about like 3 feet of safety margin for people walking along the roads. Well, nobody's following that on that street. I mean, for the most part. I think today I had 2 cars that actually stopped while another car went down by. But, I just worry about the dog and, of course, and my wife. And that's why I've been bringing the dog out, because I can just pick him up and yank him up with his harness. But again, the sidewalks would make a great deal. They make a big difference on that street and anywhere else in town. But no, that's just my biggest concern because of the heavy traffic, and that's why I raised my hand in support of a footbridge. Because I usually go down that way because that's the easiest way for me to go to work. don't have to, where I walk to work.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. My name is Sarah. I live on Rawson Avenue. I would like to reiterate our feelings on many of the things that everyone has addressed tonight, that no one stops at the stop sign. Cars do drive very quickly down Ames Terrace, as well as when the bridge was open, they drove very fast down Rawson Avenue. I am a proponent of the walking bridge or a pedestrian bridge. There are a significant amount of walkers and bikers and children on various modes of transportation that travel down the road. In regards to thinking about the DOT paying for half of a pedestrian bridge or half of a vehicular bridge, if we chose to go with a pedestrian bridge, that cost would be much less than a vehicle bridge. Is there any way to possibly barter for sidewalks as well as a pedestrian bridge on Ames Terrace? Just throwing it out there. Okay. Like if we did just a pedestrian bridge instead of a vehicle bridge, could we also get sidewalks on Ames Terrace? Okay.
Yeah, it would be a separate project. It's a separate conversation. There actually are other sidewalk projects, one on 105, one in downtown, already in DOT's work plan. So we're not ignoring the interest and the responsibility on our part to provide where we can funding for sidewalks. But there's not a barter opportunity here.
I thought it would be worth asking.
That's not a state road, is it? Would you ever put sidewalks where it's not a state road?
I clearly have no idea.
It is possible through a particular grant program, but generally not as part of funding that DOT puts out and for projects in its work plan. But it's not impossible to do.
Just to clarify, I did get, looking at a proposal on 6 foot and an 8 foot wide bridge, came in at 120 and 145,000. Roughly that included permitting, engineering and all that. So for a pedestrian bridge. And that's a 6 foot wide and an 8 foot wide.
Yeah, just to be clear, then I make confused things. There are 3 things that have been discussed to date. And by the way, this is an engineering discussion that belongs with MDOT because it gets a little complicated. The replacement, as Jerry mentioned, of replacing the bridge for pedestrian traffic is in the order of $1.4, $1.5 million. True. I'm sorry, for vehicular traffic. For replacing the bridge is in that order of magnitude. It's just over 7 digits. To put a pedestrian bridge, full built, custom built in the same spot as that is probably in the order of, I said, about $500,000 or $600,000. Now, the one you're talking about is not in the same spot. It was the one we looked at for adjacency, and that is a much less expensive option, probably in the order of $200 to $250. Not in the same place as the current bridges.
Not in the exact same location. Coming from one thought, and this is just, we're trying to think outside the box here, to look also at the issues of where the river runs and hits that bank, right, where the bridge is. So if you can actually go kind of more perpendicular to the river rather than on that, at the bend, to drop you off at the Riverwalk, is an idea, and that could be in about $120,000. Throwing that out there. Again, we're looking at every option here. I mean, when DOT comes in and is going to have to change or put a turnaround or a hammerhead at the end of the road, that's not on. That's going to be on someone's property likely too. So.
No, and I think it's important to clarify that MDOT owns this bridge. Currently controls it. We have no control over it whatsoever at this point in time. Right. So we have to have discussions with MDOT about what the flexibility. So we didn't, at this point, there are other options for pedestrian that would be less expensive on the same right-of-way where the road is. We haven't investigated those with MDOT yet, so it's not fair to bring those to the table at this point to cost them out. We just or mentioning what's been discussed. There's a lot more discussion that has
And
to
I think
happen.
we're just trying to be conscious of what DOT's budget issues are and what town budget issues are and trying to come up with reasonable alternatives that are more financially doable.
And Kevin Bedford again. Are demolition costs of an issue here? Does DOT take care of 100% of demolition costs if it's simply taken out?
You mean taken out and not replaced?
Correct. Or let's say that you take the bridge out and in fact a pedestrian bridge is put adjacent.
The cost of removing the current structure that exists there today. There's a cost to
Correct.
do that. I think it's his question, and he's asking, will MDOT cover the cost of taking out the concrete and rebar that's there today?
What I'm wondering is there's a significant difference between an adjacent pedestrian bridge and a bridge in the same place. Is that because of, we assume, an expense for part of the demolition?
No, unfortunately, it gets into detail. Really, a custom-built, there's very many options in bridges, and MDOT knows better than I do. A custom-built pedestrian bridge is more expensive. That was discussed. That's a little more expensive. Are
there off-the-shelf pedestrian bridges?
Yes.
Really? Awesome.
Yes.
Oh,
Yes.
that's cool.
If you ever been to a golf course where you're going over a water thing with a golf cart, they build them custom up to 70 feet. Because that can be trucked at that length. Yes, that can be done. That's why 6 or 8 foot are pretty standard practice. So it could, and that has not been discussed with MDOT at all. Now, could that work in the existing right of way? That's a discussion we have to have with MDOT. And by the way, it would bring the cost of versus a custom built pedestrian, which are beautiful, by the way. They're really very, very attractive architecturally, and that you pay for it, right? It's like a pretty house. You got to pay for the options. But that doesn't have to be a custom bridge across. But we can't take the liberty in our discussions in the town because we don't control the bridge.
Right.
So in fairness, we have to have a conversation. We will have a conversation. But I'm just curious Jeff did a great thing. I had a poll about all of you who the preponderance were in favor of pedestrian. Is there a preponderance against doing vehicular traffic? I don't see a preponderance. Against, in other words, is there anybody here who would
As a positive, who wants the bridge?
who would like to see the bridge as either a driveway or pedestrian? Oh, okay. So basically, am I hearing the preponderance says pedestrian period? No, see, I don't hear that. I think that's what Steve is trying to hear, and I'm trying to hear too. Is if there's, I heard one gentleman talk about the interest. Yeah, yes, and I've heard that. I think twice. I've heard twice tonight about people who would like to see this as vehicular, which obviously allows pedestrian at the same time.
And some would have to be done with speed.
Well, okay, all right, okay. One thing at a time, one fire drill at a time.
But I think there is a preponderance of people want something.
Do we have to push that? It's green. When it's green, it's on. Okay.
Bob, I think there is a preponderance of people want something across that river. Right, I'll take a zip line, quite honestly, if that's what it comes to. Little doggy sidecar on it or something.
Well,
Would be perfect.
obviously, the cost of a vehicular bridge is much higher for both MDOT and the town, and we have to worry about costs, blah, 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 in the town, for our mutual benefit. A pedestrian bridge will be less expensive, without question. But I'm just trying to get a feel for, and I did hear a couple of people say they really felt strongly that the traffic has been increased on Ames Terrace and blah, 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 because you can't take cars across Rawson Bridge. And if we build a pedestrian bridge, that will remain the same. That won't change, right? So I just was curious about that part. Yeah, and I didn't mean to cut off the question, and I did, and Mark reminded me. The question was asked about if the bridge is demolished, does MDOT cover that cost?
And my question back to you is, do you mean if another bridge, either pedestrian or vehicular, is going to be built in that place, or if no bridge is built.
Well, let's, both. Both.
If no bridge is built, then DOT would cover the cost of the demolition and removal.
And reberming.
And reberm it and create turnarounds for vehicles. If we're sharing the full project with the town going forward in either mode, then that would be part of the shared cost, I believe. It's been described to me as a straight 50-50 match offer.
Yeah, that's how it's written. That's the literal interpretation.
Hi, my name is Tom. I'm a new resident on Rawson. The bridge is dead. You own it. When are you going to take it away?
What's the time frame for that?
Yeah. I don't know the time frame for removing the dead bridge.
Okay.
And maybe this is a good time actually to pivot to time frame because that's not an easy discussion. And I can tell you at the outset, there's a long fuse with that. I put that question because clearly it was a question that folks in town would ask to the chief engineer at DOT, and she said best estimates would be no earlier than 2023. And she says that essentially based on the myriad of projects, bridge projects just in this region, to say nothing of the other regions of Maine that are already in the work plan. Currently, there are 20 some odd bridges in DOT's most recent work plan simply in the Mid-Coast region that will either be beginning preliminary engineering or construction in the next 3 years or so. So there's a tremendous crush of demand. We've had to forego projects last year that included bridge projects because bid estimates were so high. So that's even more difficult, clearly, than the funding discussions is the timing discussion. It's a long period to get something engineered and built within the DOT system, simply based on demand and the size and the scale of the state and the scope of the need.
That's really helpful. And I just wanted to summarize, we are just Millville, but that Rawson Avenue Bridge does give us access to our school for our kids, our only market, and the walkway along the river that has been a lot of work put into. And it seems to me that if the Department of Transportation did not maintain the bridge is failing, and the traffic is being diverted, you do owe us making that diversion path safe with sidewalks and lights. For 3 years, we're going to have way too many people. I won't repeat it, but everything that was said about the curve, the hill, the lack of lighting, and the speed with which the traffic goes, it's very unsafe. And that's what's being diverted by this. So I can't imagine sidewalks take all that much engineering. I don't know. But if we're going to divert the traffic for 3 years, then we've got to get some lighting and we've got to get a path there that's safe for people to travel. Ellen Heckard, Rawson Avenue.
And I'd like to add one more thing. Again, confirm that you will ask, because of the 3-year period, you will ask the engineers if there is a way to do some sort of repair so that it could continue in that time frame as a pedestrian bicycle bridge. Because it looks like that will make a huge difference. And maybe it may not stick to the letter of the law, but the spirit of the law and what it would do for the community would be a huge thing. And if you can follow through in that, that would be great.
I will follow through on that. And I know that Allison, I think, has a question or a comment.
while we had everybody here, I just thought maybe since I've also wanted a sidewalk there for a very long time. And sometimes it seems like when the town or the state goes to do that, it turns out to be very, very difficult because everybody argues about which side of the street it's going to go on. And I'm just curious if everybody, maybe just something to be mulling over, if the neighborhood could agree on that, it would certainly make it easier for the town or the state at some point to move forward. But my question for you is if we're looking at waiting until 2023 to even, is that for a whole project to be finished or just to, or also to demolish the bridge? Are you thinking of leaving it up until 2023? Is that what?
I actually can't answer that question, unfortunately, and I can also try to tease that out.
Because it just seems
that's an engineering question for the bridge division in that it's their particular responsibility, but
it just seems that if it's so urgent that not even, it's such a dangerous bridge that not even a person can cross it, then doesn't it also pose some sort of an environmental hazard if it collapses? I mean, does DOT have any responsibility if it just, even if it doesn't hurt a person, if it just collapses into the river? That's, I would imagine that DP doesn't, like that kind of thing. And I don't know, maybe do you want to respond to that or?
Well, we clearly own it. So if the bridge were to collapse into the Mguntacook, yes, we would have an obvious responsibility to deal with it at that time. But I can't tell you tonight what the normal time frame is for demolishing the bridge and whether it would be done well in advance of a rebuild or whether it would simply be left in place until the rebuild began.
I guess it just seems that somebody has clearly made a decision that it's not there isn't an extremely high danger of it collapsing right away, or it would have to be taken out, I would imagine, really quickly.
Well, the decision that has been made is that scofflaws ought not to cross it, I guess. But beyond that, I can't tell you if a calculus has been made about absolutely when it should be removed.
Okay.
I can tell you, and this might just be an interesting point of interest for you all, is that DOT inspects and maintains almost 3,000 bridges in this state, and across an immense and diverse landscape. And so if you've seen less attention to this bridge, that's part of the rationale, is that people's attention is scattered far and wide to bridges that carry very many varying degrees of volume of people daily. For instance, the Main Street Bridge here over the Mguntacook, that's 11,000 vehicles on a daily basis. The bridge just below Ames Terrace is about 4,800 or so. Rawson Avenue, 830 on a daily basis. So as you can see, DOT is obligated to triage the attention and investment it makes in an enormous number of bridges throughout the state.
I guess I'm just trying to figure out what would be the quickest possible path moving forward. Sometimes we spend all this time trying to think, okay, how are we going to save $100,000 here or there? But in this case, a lot of people's lives are impacted, and it might be worth it for the state or the town to say, you know what, it's worth it to pay more now for the town. Is the fastest way for the town just to move forward and say, we want to build a bridge, a pedestrian bridge, in a slightly different place so that we don't have to wait until DOT takes out the other one?
Well, I mean, the town needs to figure out what its course wants to be going forward, and frankly, DOT needs to do that as well internally, partly based on the questions that you've raised tonight, and partly based on internal discussions and the way the organization generally does business and the other priorities it has. That's the most I can offer you. We need to go away and think and work on this, and then share information on best steps going forward.
Yeah, the engineering, that location that I was thinking about for an alternative bridge, it's got to work with DOT's demo removal, and it may not, so it may be challenging to try to get a bridge in that location while this other one's still there waiting for it to demo, because when they demo, they're going to have to deal with the stream or the riverbank and stabilize that. So it may be complicated to try to do a pedestrian bridge at one location while the bridge is still there waiting for it to be demoed. I'm just throwing that out.
So
but
really,
that,
we should just be pushing for demolition as fast as possible.
I would think so, but I think the select board probably ought to take this up at some meeting at some point in the near future.
Just, Jeff Scott, just a couple of clarifications. One is, a sidewalk on Rawson Avenue has been in the Pathways Master Plan for 10 years, okay? We've been trying to move that forward in the town budget. The town budget has like 29 million back maintenance between roads and...
No, not including roads and sidewalks.
Not including roads and sidewalks? Okay, a lot. So that's what that's as a household, that's what we're juggling too. Another point, Allison, we've already surveyed the community on Rawson Avenue and have already decided as a community which side the sidewalk goes on. It's already unanimous.
Which side?
Not your side. Getchell side.
I mean, what is preventing?
Getchell side.
What
So
is
that's already
preventing?
happened.
But what is preventing the town from moving forward? Because whenever we sit around for the budget,
It's the money, it's the budget.
No, but I've
It's
been on the
drainage.
select board for 2 years, and it's never. Nobody's ever said no to money. I've never been even given the opportunity to vote yes to recommend a sidewalk. I ask every year, could we do a sidewalk there? I don't know what the barrier is. Maybe it's,
Oh, it's
is it the
another
Pathways
subject.
Committee?
I'm just
I
trying to
don't-
clarify this to the group. And then the last point is, just to add to the calculus that I forgot to mention, and I don't know if a lot of you are aware of it, the middle school cross-country team used to run down Rawson Avenue, and they don't anymore because of the bridge. So they run up around Ames Terrace now, and they've got... No, they didn't do it. No, this is the first year. Yeah, and so now there's a mob, there's about 30 to 35 kids, because there's no other sport. They run up Ames Terrace, and there's adults with orange things and trying to keep them up against the side. You've seen it now. Yeah, it's like, whoa. And they got bicycles and trying to mob them. So that's part of the calculus too, and that's why a lot of the people on Ames are saying, we need a sidewalk.
Question from the gentleman in the back again, and then I think, unless there's opposition, we're probably at the point of closing the meeting and returning to our respective corners.
So I have a quick question. I'm Dave Getchell. I live on Rawson Avenue and have for going on 30 years. That bridge, the Rawson Avenue bridge, what is the part of it that's failing? I've been under that bridge on my canoe going upstream and downstream, and the part of that bridge, to me, that's failing is the middle pier. If that bridge was demolished, wouldn't the existing abutments on either side be a great place to start a pedestrian bridge and cut a huge amount of the cost of a pedestrian bridge?
One, the report suggests that the part of the bridge that's in worst condition is the substructure, actually. And one thing I have heard the engineers say is that the abutments would be removed. They wouldn't work, they wouldn't keep those in place and build onto them or over them.
I guess what I would suggest now, Steve, is maybe for the town staff and a consultant of ours to meet with your engineering group to really hash out some of these different scenarios, and then we can bring them to the select board and then have a meeting about it in front of the select board. because there's a lot going back and forth here, and it's hard to come to any, I mean, we're not going to come to any resolution tonight.
Right.
You were seeking input, and it's
Right.
very clear that the town wants to have at least a pedestrian bridge at that location and in a hurry and not wait 3 or 4 or 5 years. So that would be my recommendation, that you get your engineering folks or bridge group together so that we can sit down and really try to come up with a game plan that we can take to the town, and then therefore you guys can get something on your schedule.
Right. Seems like a rational next step to me. Yeah.
Yes, Anita Ambrosia Scott again. I haven't heard you address how DOT would approach the question of the turnarounds that do need to be put on either side. Some of these private property owners are present in the room. I'm surprised they haven't asked the question, but I'm curious about how it will impact the private properties where those turnarounds would be. And also,
well, can I answer that? Because
please do. Yeah.
Then
one more. Yeah, thank you.
If we move on to the next question, I lose the first. But essentially, our right-of-way, based on what the engineering for the bridge needs to be, our right-of-way group would either acquire or not, depending upon the turnaround needs, the access required in order to do that. So, yeah, there would be a possibility of a taking, much too early to say.
Okay, thank you. The other question is the Select Board Chair and Jeremy have talked about that they've looked at the potential of replacing the bridge, but in a, I don't know, slightly or somewhat different location. Would DOT financially consider that? If that's the solution the town chooses, will DOT pay half of the cost if the location of that bridge is not precisely where this bridge is, and if the town chooses perhaps a safer or better location that replaces this bridge?
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that, and I don't know what case studies within the organization would tell me that, but clearly that's
Right.
a question that we would.
I think we would get to that answer once we sat down with the bridge folks and chatted about it. Yep.
My question is, Peter Kalajian from Camden. My question is, is the DOT in conversation with the governor, because one of the governor's priorities is to become to lead on becoming reducing fossil fuel footprint of Maine, and she's committed to 50% reduction by 2050. So a footbridge is a pretty substantial way to diminish fossil fuel footprint. So in light of catastrophic climate change, it would seem to me that the DOT and the governor's office should be coordinating on what are we doing here to make sure that we're minimizing car use and maximizing pedestrian use. So I think it's walkability and minimization of carbon footprint. We haven't had a killing frost yet. I think that's a record. So I think it's important that the DOT is fully on board with the governor's initiative here, and let's make this happen.
Well, on a macro level, I can say that the DOT staff are on the Governor's Climate Council, and in fact, there is a transportation section of that Climate Council where, once again, DOT is participating. Now, I don't think that effort, which has just kicked off, hasn't drilled down as far as a small bridge in Camden yet. But on a macro level, we're connected. Thank you. If that's it, then I want to thank all of you for coming out and earnestly sharing your thoughts with us tonight. And we will move forward in the way that Jeremy described. I live here, The planners within DOT are protective of projects and municipalities in their region and are meant to serve essentially as an advocate and a conduit for what municipalities need from the department. So I hope to work on your behalf to see this thing to fruition. Thank you.
I'm Sarah Andrews.
Wyatt, Mike, nice to